that actually, in terms of this spike in violent crime that we're seeing at the moment, that actually it might not be all attributable to the cuts in policing? What's your assessment of what's going on here?
Well, of course, the spike in knife crime isn't solely attributable to the cuts to the police, but undeniably, if you take 20,000 police officers off the street, then that ties their ability to be able to respond to knife crime. And crucially, it's also taken neighbourhood policing off our streets. We've seen countless neighbourhood officers taken away towards doing back office functions or responding to crimes when they're committed, and that reduces their ability to prevent crime in the first place. The last Labour government set up safer neighbourhood teams. It created this model of neighbourhood policing, which is the absolute bedrock of how we do policing in this country, and allows our police to police by consent. And that's what enabled them to build up trust in communities, to gather intelligence and to prevent crime from happening in the first place. So of course those cuts to policing have hampered that ability to do that. But it's not just cuts to policing. This government has also cut youth services, have cut early intervention, have cut prevention services, and all of that has led to a breeding ground for knife crime to rise.
But just in terms of going back again to the interview you just had with Stafford there, I mean, it is pretty clear that there is a long-held disdain for concern about the police force and within some communities here in the United Kingdom. I mean, how best to try and redress that? How best to try and get these communities back on side so there isn't this them and us mentality, which does appear to exist in large tracts of inner city England?
It is a huge problem. I used to be a special constable myself in Brixton, so I know this only too well. And that's why we've been saying that we need to take a public health approach to tackling knife crime. We can't arrest ourselves out of this problem. We can't prosecute our way out of this problem. And we've got a fantastic example on our doorstep in Scotland, which used to be one of the most dangerous countries in the developed world, one of the most violent countries in the developed world. Last year, they didn't have a single young person that was killed through bladed weapons or through knives, and that's because they took a cross-governmental approach to tackling knife crime. They worked with health, they worked with mental health, they worked with schools and early intervention. Yes, it's led by the police, but it worked across governments like this, and it led mentorship programs in schools looking at why young people carried knives and why they were using them violently against each other. We've not had a research program in this country since 2006 as to why young people are carrying knives at school and in their home lives. So we don't know what the impact of austerity or indeed of the changes around social media have had on why young people are carrying knives. And that should have been there in today's announcement from the government on their serious violence strategy. But again, we've just seen a criminal justice response to the problem. We've not seen anything about prevention or early intervention, and we're not seeing anything about putting back in place those programmes or indeed learning any of the lessons from Scotland. And that's what we're saying we would do differently if we were in government right now.
Well actually, I mean, the situation in Scotland is rather more complicated than that. Yes, it's absolutely true to say that the number of deaths from knives have come down incredibly, but actually, if you are in the kind of the bottom end of the socio-economic spectrum, you still remain most at risk of violent attack. I just want to raise a point, though, that Trevor Phillips, the former head of the Commission for Racial Equality, has made. You know, he says, look, the problem is quite clearly not in white-dominated, middle-class, leafy Surrey. It is in black communities in the inner cities. And in those areas, because of the problems that we're seeing with violence, it demands a tougher police response.
I mean, I can understand what he's saying, but from all the evidence we've seen, a tougher approach on things like stop and search just doesn't bring those communities back round. It does increase that attitude of them versus us. And actually, in New York City, where they all but abolished stop and search, they saw the number of violent crimes reduce. Now, I'm not saying that we should do that. I use stop and search as a special constable, and I think it's an important tool for tackling knife crime. But I do think it needs to be on an intelligence-led basis. It needs to be done properly within the law, and it needs to be done proportionately. I don't think rushing in with a blanket approach in these areas will help improve trust and confidence in the communities. But we do need the police on the streets. We do need a visible police presence. I welcome Cressida Dick's announcement that there will be extra police on the streets this weekend, but we need to recognise that those are not additional police officers. They will have been removed from other tasks. They will have been taken off rest days. They will have been taken off other areas, perhaps of investigation. The police are struggling like they have never struggled before, and not only have they been cut, but the demand on their time is at unprecedented levels, not just from rising crime, but from having to deal with responses to issues around mental health and other vulnerabilities as other public services have been cut. So the police are really struggling to fight this problem with at least one hand tied behind their back.
Just in terms of, I mean, again, on stop and search, I mean, it was, of course, Theresa May, back when she was Home Secretary, who, pushed forward a reduction in the use of those powers. I mean, I wonder what you make of the government's response as outlined today, banning under-18s carrying corrosive substances in public places, stopping the delivery of knives to residential addresses. I mean, both of those things would go some way to dealing with the problem, wouldn't they?
Of course, and, it's a welcome step, but we've been calling on them to do exactly this for some time now. We asked the Home Office to bring in a proper licensing system for the sale of corrosive substances. They failed to do that. We said that we would support them in Parliament last year about making acid a possession offence and improving these powers around stop and search. So they've really been kicking the can down the road on these issues. And as I say, we've seen nothing today around preventative measures for this issue. It's all about cracking down at the criminal justice end of things, which, as we know, just doesn't solve the problem. So, welcome baby steps today, but we're still a long way from really getting to the root of this problem.
Is it incorrect for some, as they have done, to identify this as black-on-black crime?
No, clearly there is a huge issue in our black communities around knife crime, and there are issues around the way the media report it. I think, we do see lesser media coverage of these kind of crimes. We do see a lesser reaction to them. So I think it does now, with the scale of the problem in London in particular, it needs concerted political will from government, a cross-party approach working with our mayor in London, but crucially, a public health approach to how we tackle this. As I say, we can't solely take a criminal justice one, as we're seeing from this government. It needs to be looking at the reasons why this crime occurs and working with offenders and working with communities in order to tackle it. But clearly there is a major issue still of trust in the police and working with the police in these communities, and that's what needs to be addressed.